My name is Amelia Meadows, and I am 83 years old. From the window of my study, I can see the spires of Cambridge, and on my desk, letters from naturalists in every corner of the globe wait to be answered. They call me a pioneer, a luminary, a founder of modern entomology. But I have never forgotten the silence. I have never forgotten the feeling of being the odd, dusty specimen in my own family's collection, carefully pinned under glass, labeled peculiar and unmarriageable. They celebrated my cousin for the hearts she collected, while I collected moths, and for the longest time I never imagined my quiet, solitary passion would become the sweetest, most satisfying revenge. It was a revenge I never sought, but one that arrived on the wings of a butterfly that science insisted could not exist, brought to light by a man my family hoped would be just another social conquest. Before I reveal what made a man who walked with Darwin stand up to my entire family and change my life with a single pronouncement, I want to welcome you to my story. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It is always a wonder to see how far these stories travel, and if you have ever felt like your passions were misunderstood or dismissed, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new faces here, please subscribe to join our community of people who know that sometimes the things others overlook are the most valuable things of all. The world of my childhood was a world of polished surfaces, the gleaming mahogany of the dining table, the waxed parquet floors of the ballroom, the brilliant, flawless complexion of my cousin Isabella. Our family estate, Oaken Grove, was a jewel of the county, and Isabella was its crown princess. She was blessed with the kind of beauty that demanded attention, hair the color of spun gold, eyes the blue of a summer sky, and a laugh that sounded like tiny melodic bells. My own features were quieter. My hair was the color of autumn leaves, my eyes a hazel that shifted with the light, and my laughter was a rare thing, usually reserved for the discovery of a particularly interesting beetle. From our earliest days, the paths of our lives were drawn in starkly different inks. Isabella's was a gilded calligraphy of dance cards, social calls, and whispered admirations. Mine was a scrawled, earth-stained script of field notes, sketches of wing venation, and the quiet contentment of solitude. I remember one afternoon when I was perhaps 7 years old. I had found it at the base of an old oak, a prize beyond imagining, the caterpillar of a puss moth. It was an astonishing creature, a vibrant green with a startling, almost demonic face marking on its back, a defensive posture that made it look like a tiny, otherworldly dragon. My heart hammered with the thrill of discovery. I cupped it gently in my hands and ran, breathless, into the morning room where my mother was supervising Isabella's fitting for a new party dress. The room was a sea of silk and lace, the air thick with the scent of my mother's rosewater perfume. "Mother, look!" I burst out, my voice high with excitement. I held out my hands, revealing the caterpillar. My mother, who had been admiring the way a satin bow sat on Isabella's shoulder, recoiled as if I'd offered her a snake. Her face, usually a placid mask of maternal pride for her niece, hardened into a frown of disgust. "Amelia, for heaven's sake, get that grubby thing out of this house this instant. Look at your hands, they're covered in filth." Isabella, perched on a stool like a porcelain doll, wrinkled her perfect nose. "It's horrid, Aunt. Amelia always finds such ugly things," the seamstress tutted, pulling the silk away as if my presence might contaminate it. My mother sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "Go and wash, Amelia. And do try to find something cleaner to occupy your time." I stood there for a moment, the tiny wondrous life in my hands feeling suddenly shameful. I retreated, the sound of their light, dismissive laughter following me down the hall. In the washroom I looked at the caterpillar. It wasn't horrid or ugly. It was a marvel of nature's design. It was they who couldn't see. That was the day I learned my world and their world could not coexist in the same room. As the years passed, this chasm between us widened. My teenage years were a procession of social tortures. Balls and soirees at Oaken Grove were my personal hell. The orchestra's music felt like a physical assault. The crush of perfumed bodies was suffocating, and the endless, mindless chatter about who was courting whom felt like a language I could not and would not learn. I was forced into corsets that stole my breath and gowns that felt like cages. I would stand at the edge of the glittering ballroom, a ghost in pale muslin, watching Isabella float from one dance partner to another, her laughter echoing, her dance card always full. One summer night, during a particularly grand affair, the air grew so thick with expectation and cologne that I felt I would faint. I overheard my aunt, a woman whose face was a permanent mask of disapproval, whispering to a neighboring dowager, "Such a shame about Amelia. She has her mother's eyes, but none of the requisite charm. She'll never catch a husband with dirt under her nails and her head in the clouds." The dowager nodded sagely. Some girls are simply not made for society. A pity. Their words, meant to be discreet, were like tiny sharp stones thrown at me. I felt a hot flush of shame, followed by a cold wave of defiance. I slipped away through a set of French doors, escaping into the cool, fragrant night of the garden. The manicured lawns gave way to the wilder edges of the estate, my true home. The moon was a silver disk in the sky, and under its light I saw it. Clinging to the dark bark of a birch tree was a luna moth, its wings the most ethereal, pale green, its long, elegant tail stirring in the gentle breeze. It was a creature of myth and moonlight, more beautiful and more perfect than anything in that noisy, overwrought ballroom. I watched it for over an hour, completely captivated, the music and the whispers fading into insignificance. The joy I felt in that silent communion was purer and deeper than any pleasure Isabella could find in the arms of a dozen suitors. My greatest hurt, however, came when I was 20. After years of solitary study, of correspondence with minor academics who were willing to entertain a woman's inquiries, I had managed to have a small paper published. It was in a fledgling naturalist journal with a circulation of perhaps a few hundred, but to me it was everything. It was a detailed study, with my own illustrations, of the life cycle of the comma butterfly, noting a variation in its wing pattern specific to our county. I held the journal in my hands as if it were a holy text. It was proof that my passion was not just a girl's strange hobby, but a real, quantifiable pursuit. That same week, Isabella announced her engagement to Lord Harrington, a man twice her age with a vast fortune and a receding hairline. The house erupted in a frenzy of celebration. Champagne was poured, congratulations were effusive, and plans for the wedding of the season began immediately. I waited for a lull in the whirlwind, my journal clutched in my hand, my heart a nervous drum against my ribs. I found my father in his study, beaming with pride. "Father," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I have some wonderful news of my own." I held out the journal, my finger pointing to my name in the table of contents. "I've been published." He took it from me, his eyes glancing at the page for a brief second. A polite, distracted smile touched his lips. "Ah, how nice, dear. Very clever." He handed it back to me, his attention already elsewhere. "Now, have you seen the magnificent ring Lord Harrington gave your cousin? A diamond the size of a robin's egg. This match secures the family's future." He patted me on the head, the same gesture one might use on a docile pet, and swept out of the room to toast his niece's good fortune. I stood there, the journal heavy in my hands. "How nice, dear." The words were not cruel, but their casual, unthinking dismissal was more painful than any insult. He hadn't even asked what the paper was about. He hadn't seen the years of painstaking work, the early mornings, the late nights. He had only seen an irrelevant little trifle, dwarfed by the monumental importance of a well-negotiated marriage. I fled to my sanctuary. My sanctuary was a small room in the west wing that had once been used for storing linens. It was long forgotten by the rest of the family, which made it perfect. It smelled of camphor and dried leaves and the faint, acidic scent of my killing jars. Sunlight streamed through a single dusty window, illuminating the rows upon rows of glass-topped specimen drawers that lined the walls. Each one was a tiny, curated world. Brilliant blue morphos from a correspondent in Brazil, jewel-toned beetles from the Orient, and my own collection, the humble but beloved Lepidoptera of the English countryside. My journals, bound in worn leather, were stacked on a large oak desk, their pages filled with my precise, spidery handwriting and detailed ink and watercolor illustrations. This room was the only place I felt truly myself, the only place where my worth was not measured by my social graces or marital prospects. Here, I was not peculiar Amelia, I was a scholar, an observer, a chronicler of miracles. It was in this room, on a piece of black velvet, that my greatest treasure lay. I had found it 2 summers prior, in a remote marshy corner of the estate where no one ever went. It had been a flash of impossible color against the green reeds, a butterfly unlike any I had ever seen or read about. Its wings were shaped like a swallowtail's, but they were a deep, dusky purple, shot through with veins of what looked like burnished copper. Its markings were a blend of 2 distinct families of butterfly, a combination that my books and all of scientific knowledge said should not exist. I had captured it with a trembling net, my heart in my throat. I documented it, sketched it from every angle, but I could not identify it. It was my secret, my enigma, a testament to the fact that the world was still full of undiscovered wonders. It was a living, breathing question mark, and it belonged only to me. The routine of my quiet life was shattered one evening at dinner. My father cleared his throat, a sound that commanded immediate attention. "I have some momentous news," he announced, his chest puffed with importance. "We will be hosting a very distinguished guest for a fortnight. Mr. Julian Blackwell will be staying with us at Oakengrove." A ripple of excitement went through the room. Even I knew the name. Julian Blackwell was a celebrated naturalist and explorer, a man whose travels to the Amazon and the Galapagos Islands were the talk of London. He was known to be a close friend and colleague of the controversial Mr. Charles Darwin, a champion of his radical new theories on evolution. "Mr. Blackwell," my aunt exclaimed, her eyes gleaming. "What a coup, brother! How did you manage it?" "He is seeking a quiet place in the country to rest and consolidate his notes after his latest expedition," my father explained. "And our Oaken Grove is known for its tranquility and its hospitality." I saw the truth in his glance toward Isabel. This was not about tranquility, it was about opportunity. A famous, handsome, and unmarried man of science was a prize catch, far more impressive than the aging Lord Harrington. Isabella, for her part, preened. A small, confident smile played on her lips. She saw him as a new challenge, a fascinating new heart to conquer. The family buzzed with plans for dinner parties, hunts, and musical evenings. They were preparing to display their finest assets. No one looked at me. No one imagined for a second that a world-famous naturalist might have any reason to speak to the family eccentric who collected bugs. But in my chest, a different kind of excitement began to stir. It was a terrifying, fragile hope. Julian Blackwell. He would understand. He would see. Perhaps, just perhaps, he would see me. Julian Blackwell arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, not in a grand carriage, but on horseback, looking more like a weary traveler than a celebrated guest of honor. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, but it was his eyes that struck me. They were a startlingly clear shade of gray, and they were tired. They held the deep, quiet weariness of a man who had seen too much of the world to be impressed by provincial finery. My family, of course, did not notice this. They descended upon him in a flurry of welcome, my father booming, my aunt cooing, and Isabella offering a perfectly executed curtsy, her blue eyes sparkling with strategic charm. Mr. Blackwell was polite, his manners impeccable, but I could see the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his gaze swept over the ornate drawing room as if it were a cage. He was a man accustomed to vast, untamed wildernesses, and Oakengrove, for all its manicured beauty, was a prison of etiquette. That evening's dinner was a masterclass in mutual misunderstanding. The dining table gleamed under the light of a dozen chandeliers, laden with silver and crystal. My family, dressed in their finest, directed a relentless barrage of social pleasantries at our guest. Isabella, seated to his right, was at her most captivating, recounting witty anecdotes from the London season. "The Duchess of Sutherland's ball was such a crush," she sighed dramatically. "One could barely breathe, but Lord Palmerston was there, and he said the most amusing thing about the French ambassador." Mr. Blackwell nodded, a faint, polite smile on his lips, but his eyes were distant. He ate little, his attention seemingly 1,000 miles away. My mother, sensing a lull, jumped in. "Isabella is so sought after, we can barely keep up with her invitations. She has a true gift for society." Mr. Blackwell's smile did not waver. "A valuable skill, I am sure, madam." The remark was perfectly courteous, yet I heard the faintest edge of irony in his tone. In an attempt to engage him on his own terms, my father puffed out his chest. "We have some of the finest fox hunting in the county, Mr. Blackwell. We have arranged a ride for you on Friday. Our hounds are second to none." "You are very kind," Blackwell replied, "but I find I have little taste for the sport. I prefer to observe animals in their natural state, rather than at the end of a chase." An awkward silence fell. Hunting was the pinnacle of country life, a pursuit of kings and lords. To dismiss it so casually was almost a breach of decorum. Desperate to find some common ground, my aunt leaned forward. "Tell us, Mr. Blackwell, what is the London society like for a man of your stature? Are the debutantes this season as beautiful as they say?" He finally turned his full attention on her, and his gray eyes were cool. "Madam, I have spent the last 2 years in the swamps of the Malay archipelago, documenting species of beetle. I assure you the seasonal variations of London's debutantes have not been my primary focus." The rebuke was so gentle, yet so absolute, that it silenced the table. He then scanned the faces around him, a flicker of something disappointment, perhaps, in his gaze. "Your lands here are quite old. Tell me, have you observed any significant stratification in the limestone outcrops near the river? I noticed some interesting formations on my ride-in." Blank stares met his question. My father cleared his throat and changed the subject back to county politics. I sat at the far end of the table, a silent observer. My heart was pounding. Stratification, species, observation. He was speaking my language, but he was speaking it in a land of foreigners. I felt a desperate urge to answer him, to tell him about the fossilized ferns I had found in that very riverbed, but the words caught in my throat. Years of being silenced, of being the family's quiet oddity, had stolen my voice. The moment passed, Isabella launched into another story, and I shrank back into my chair, invisible once more. The days that followed settled into a pattern of polite imprisonment for Mr. Blackwell. He endured the drawing-room conversations, the pointless afternoon calls from neighbors eager to meet the famous naturalist, and the endless discussions of marriage, property, and local gossip. He escaped when he could, taking long, solitary walks across the estate, his specimen case in hand. I would watch him from my window, a tall, lonely figure striding through the fields, and I felt a kinship with him. He, too, was an alien in this world of suffocating social ritual. He grew increasingly restless. I saw his frustration in the curtness of his replies, in the way he would stand by the window, staring out at the wild woods as if planning an escape. One afternoon I was arranging some dried flora in the conservatory when he and my father passed by the open door. My father was once again trying to impress him. "A fine estate, is it not? Passed down through 5 generations. It is a beautiful property." "Lord Ashworth," Blackwell said, his voice tight with a restraint I was beginning to recognize. But I must confess, I had hoped for a different sort of stimulation. In my travels I have met men of great learning in the most humble of circumstances. Here, the intellectual curiosity seems to have been bred out in favor of good posture. My father let out a nervous laugh, unsure if it was a joke. "Ah, well, we are simple country folk, Mr. Blackwell. We concern ourselves with more practical matters." "Are we?" Blackwell murmured, more to himself than to my father. "I wonder." His words, sharp and insightful, were a balm to my soul. He saw it. He saw the gilded emptiness that I had lived with my entire life. The turning point came on a dreary, rain-swept afternoon. The weather had trapped everyone indoors, and the atmosphere in the house was as thick and heavy as the clouds outside. My aunt had cornered Mr. Blackwell in the library, determined to read him a dreadfully sentimental poem written by one of her friends. I could see him from the hallway, his face a mask of stoic endurance, cornered and desperate. Seeing his plight, I felt a surge of empathy. I retreated to my study, my one true haven. I left the door slightly ajar, a habit I had developed to listen for approaching footsteps, a signal to hide my work and pretend to be doing something more ladylike, like needlepoint. I became absorbed in my task, delicately repairing the antenna on a peacock butterfly with a tiny brush and a dot of gum Arabic. The world outside my small room faded away. The soft scratching of my brush, the scent of camphor, the quiet order of my collection, this was my reality. I was so engrossed that I didn't hear the footsteps in the hall until a shadow fell across my desk. I looked up with a start. Julian Blackwell stood in the doorway. His eyes were wide, taking in the scene before him. He had clearly escaped my aunt and wandered down the unfamiliar corridor. He was not looking at me, but at the room itself, the rows of specimen drawers, the detailed anatomical charts on the walls, the microscopes and mounting tools on my desk. His face, which had been a mask of weary boredom for days, was transformed by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. I felt a hot blush creep up my neck. I was exposed. My secret world had been breached. I expected ridicule, or at the very least a condescending smile. I do beg your pardon," I stammered, starting to rise. "It's just my hobby. I know it's a frightful mess." He held up a hand, stopping me. He stepped fully into the room, closing the door softly behind him. The sound of my aunt's droning voice was cut off. He moved around the room as if in a daze, his gaze sweeping over everything. He did not see a mess. He saw a laboratory. A hobby, he said, his voice a low murmur of disbelief. He ran his fingers lightly over the top of a specimen case filled with hawk moths. This is not a hobby, miss. This is an obsession, a magnificent obsession. He walked over to my desk and picked up one of my journals, the one on the comma butterfly. He opened it, and his eyes scanned the pages, taking in my detailed notes and illustrations. Your illustrations, he said, his voice filled with genuine awe. They are as precise as any I have seen from the engravers at the Royal Society. Your observational notes, the attention to climatic effects on wing pigmentation. This is professional work, of a very high caliber. He looked up from the journal and met my eyes. For the first time since he had arrived, he was truly seeing someone in this house. He was seeing me. Why has no one spoken of this? He asked, a note of accusation in his voice. Why have I been forced to endure endless hours of gossip about dresses and dukes when this treasure trove of knowledge was hidden away in a back room? I could not speak. A lifetime of feeling invisible and foolish was dissolving in the warmth of his sincere, professional respect. They do not consider it important, I finally managed to whisper. They consider it important to marry well, he said, his voice laced with a bitter understanding. I see. He pulled up a simple wooden stool, the one I used for hours of microscopic work, and sat down opposite me. Tell me everything, he said, his tired gray eyes now bright with an intense, focused curiosity. Start with your classification system. It appears you have devised your own unique shorthand. I am fascinated, and so I began to talk. Hesitantly at first, then with a growing confidence I never knew I possessed, I explained my work. I told him of my theories on mimicry among local moths, of the strange migratory patterns of the painted lady I had observed for the past 5 years. He listened, not with polite indulgence, but with the keen attention of a true colleague. He asked sharp, insightful questions. He challenged one of my assumptions about a species of skipper, and we fell into a lively technical debate. We spoke for hours. The rain lashed against the window pane, the light in the room began to fade, but neither of us noticed. For the first time in my life, I was not explaining my passion, I was sharing it, and in the eyes of this brilliant worldly man, I saw not the reflection of a peculiar spinster, but the reflection of a fellow scientist. It was the most profound validation I had ever known. A sense of boldness, entirely foreign to me, had taken root in the soil of his respect. After our second and then third long conversation in my study, a sanctuary now shared, I knew I had to show him. It was a terrifying prospect. My unidentified butterfly was more than a specimen, it was a secret part of my soul. To expose it to judgment, even the judgment of a man I admired, felt like standing naked in the public square. But the scientist in me, the part of myself he had awakened, knew that I couldn't keep it hidden forever. A question of this magnitude deserved to be asked. One afternoon, as he was examining my collection of ground beetles, I took a deep breath. Mr. Blackwell, I said, my voice barely a whisper, there is something else, something I have not shown to anyone. His head came up, his gray eyes instantly curious. He saw the gravity on my face and set down the magnifying glass he was holding. I have it in a separate case, I explained, my hands trembling slightly as I walked to a small locked chest in the corner of the room. I retrieved a small flat box made of dark mahogany. It felt impossibly heavy. I placed it on the desk between us and slowly, deliberately, undid the brass clasps. The lid creaked open. There it was, pinned perfectly against the stark white background, its wings spread in a posture of impossible beauty. The dusky purple, the veins of metallic copper, the uncanny blend of morphological traits that defied every textbook I had ever read. A profound silence descended upon the room. It was not an awkward silence, but a heavy, reverent one. Mr. Blackwell leaned forward, his body tense. The air seemed to crackle around him. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply stared, his entire being focused on the tiny, fragile form in the box. 1 minute passed, then 2. He seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. The casual, weary naturalist was gone, replaced by a hunter who had just cornered the most elusive and legendary prey of his career. I could see the thoughts racing behind his eyes, the frantic turning of pages in the vast library of his mind. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering just above the glass lid, as if he could feel the scientific energy radiating from the specimen. Then he spoke, his voice a choked, disbelieving whisper. The wing venation. It follows the primary branching of the Papilinidae, but the secondary structure, that is pure Nymphalidae, and the antennae clubbed, but with a subtle segmentation near the base. My God. He finally looked up at me, and his face was pale, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made me take a step back. "Miss Meadows," he said, his voice shaking with the force of his discovery, "do you have any idea what this is? This is not just a new species. This is a transitional form, a living, breathing testament to gradual modification. Darwin predicted this. He wrote that we should find such creatures, forms that bridge the gaps between established families. We have been searching for years, and you found it in a marsh at the edge of your garden." The sheer, world-shifting magnitude of his words washed over me. I had known it was special, unique. I had not dared to imagine this. At that precise, pivotal moment, the door to my study swung open without a knock. Isabella stood there, a vision in pale yellow silk, my mother hovering just behind her. Their faces were masks of polite impatience. "There you are, Mr. Blackwell," Isabella chirped, her voice like grating porcelain. "We have been looking all over for you. The vicar and his wife have arrived for tea. You simply must come." Her eyes fell upon the scene before her. Mr. Blackwell and I, our heads close together, our expressions intense, both staring at what was, to her, nothing more than a dead insect in a box. Her perfectly shaped lips curled into a condescending smirk. "Oh, Amelia," she sighed, with an air of theatrical exasperation, "are you still boring our poor guest with your creepy crawlies? You must forgive my cousin, Mr. Blackwell. She has the strangest hobbies." My mother chimed in, her voice edged with mortification. "Amelia, dear, put that away at once. Mr. Blackwell has far more important things to do than look at your collection of moths. You are being terribly rude." I flinched, the old shame washing over me. I started to close the box, but Blackwell's hand shot out, resting firmly on the lid, stopping me. He straightened up to his full height, turning slowly to face the two women in the doorway. The transformation in him was terrifying and glorious. The weariness was gone, burned away by a fire of intellectual fury and righteous indignation. He was no longer a guest in their house. He was a titan of science standing in his temple, and they were blasphemers at the gate. "Madam," he said, and his voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a shard of ice, silencing them instantly. "Your daughter," he continued, his gaze fixed on my mother, "is not boring me. On the contrary, she has just shown me what may well be the single most important entomological discovery of our lifetime." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suddenly thick air. "This creepy crawly, as your niece so eloquently puts it," he gestured to the butterfly with a reverence that made it seem like a crown jewel, "is a key that could unlock one of the greatest and most contentious debates of our age. It provides tangible evidence for Mr. Darwin's theory of natural selection. This specimen, ladies, will be presented at the Royal Society. It will be discussed in the halls of Cambridge and Oxford for decades, perhaps centuries, to come. It will change the very way we see the natural world." He took a breath, his eyes finding mine, and in them I saw a fierce protective loyalty. Then he turned his gaze back to my stunned mother and cousin. "And when it is discussed," he said, his voice ringing with absolute, unimpeachable authority, "it will forever be known by the name I intend to give it, Oenon Amelia, after its brilliant and meticulous discoverer, Miss Amelia Meadows." An abyss of silence opened up in the room. It was a silence so profound I could hear the frantic, triumphant beating of my own heart. Isabella's jaw was slack, her social poise utterly shattered. My mother's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, disbelief, confusion, and the dawning, horrifying realization that they had just insulted the very thing this great man valued most. Their entire world, a world built on beauty, social standing, and advantageous marriages, had just been weighed against a small purple butterfly and found wanting. I stood there, bathed in the glow of his words, and felt a lifetime of being underestimated fall away from me like a dusty old coat. I was not Amelia, the peculiar. I was Amelia Meadows, the discoverer, and in that moment, in my small forgotten room, the world had been irrevocably, gloriously remade. The retreat of my mother and Isabel was a masterpiece of silent, awkward motion. They backed out of the doorway as if leaving the presence of royalty, their faces pale with shock and a confusion so deep it had rendered them speechless. The moment the door clicked shut, the electric tension in the room remained, but its nature changed. It was no longer a confrontation, but a shared, vibrating thrill of discovery. Julian, I could not think of him as Mr. Blackwell any longer, turned back to me, his face alight with a joy so pure it was breathtaking. We must document everything, he said, his voice urgent and alive. Every detail of the location, the date, the time of day, the weather conditions, your original notes, where are they? For the next hour, we were no longer a host and guest, not a man and a woman, but two minds fused by a single purpose. I retrieved the journal from the year of the discovery, and we pored over my frantic, excited scribbles. He fired questions at me, and I answered, my memory sharp and clear. The marsh to the northeast, you say? Near the old stone wall? Yes, just beyond it. The reeds there are taller than a man. It was clinging to a stalk of marsh thistle. In the late afternoon, the sun would have been at a low angle. Did you notice any other species nearby? Any potential food sources? We worked as partners, his vast theoretical knowledge combining with my intimate localized observations. A new kind of intimacy bloomed between us, one forged in the shared language of science and mutual respect. It was more profound than any romance my cousin could ever comprehend. That evening, dinner was a strange and stilted affair. The news had clearly spread through the house via the servants' grapevine. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions and a palpable shift in the household center of gravity. For the first time in my life, I was the focus of attention. My father, who usually spoke only of politics or crop prices, kept trying to engage me in conversation. So, Amelia, he began, clearing his throat loudly, this, butterfly of yours. Mr. Blackwell seems to think it's quite something. It appears to be a significant find, father, I replied, my voice calm and steady. And what does that mean exactly, he pressed, his brow furrowed. In practical terms, is it valuable? I saw Julian tense beside me. Its value cannot be measured in pounds sterling, Lord Ashworth, he interjected smoothly, his tone polite but firm. Its value is in the knowledge it represents. It is a piece of the great puzzle of life itself. Your daughter has found a piece that scholars have been seeking for a decade. My father nodded slowly, not understanding, but comprehending the weight of Julian's authority. Isabella was unusually quiet. She sat opposite me, pushing her food around her plate. She kept glancing at Julian, then at me, her expression a mixture of resentment and bewilderment. Her primary weapon, her charm, her beauty, had been rendered completely ineffective. Julian now directed most of his conversation to me, discussing the logistics of preparing a formal paper for submission, completely oblivious to Isabella's sidelong glances and pouty sighs. She tried once to reclaim the spotlight. Mr. Blackwell, I heard the most amusing story about Lady Danbury's new French poodle. Julian paused, turning to her with a look of polite inquiry. Did you? He said, before turning back to me. Now, Amelia, regarding the preservation of the specimen for transport, I suggest a double-sealed container with dried silica. Isabella flushed a deep, unbecoming red. It was not a deliberate slight on his part, it was simply that in that moment, she and her stories were the least interesting things in the room. For her, it was a public humiliation of the highest order. Later that evening, the rain had stopped, and a cool, clean scent rose from the damp earth. I had escaped to the garden needing to breathe, to process the day's seismic shifts. I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me and turned to see Julian. He came to stand beside me at the low stone wall overlooking the moonlit fields. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. My behavior in your study this afternoon was intemperate. I put you in a very awkward position with your family. I looked at his strong profile, silhouetted against the night sky. Please do not apologize, I said, my voice filled with a gratitude that felt as vast as the sky above us. You spoke the truth. For the first time, someone spoke the plain, unvarnished truth in that house. You have no idea what that meant to me. He was silent for a moment. Perhaps I do, he said softly. To be surrounded by people who cannot see you for who you are, it is a unique form of loneliness. We stood in a comfortable silence, two solitary souls who had unexpectedly found a comrade. Then he turned to me, his expression serious. Amelia, he said, using my given name for the first time. It sounded startlingly right. You cannot stay here. Your work, your mind, it will atrophy in this environment. You must come to London. I want you to co-author the paper with me. No, he corrected himself, I will help you write it, but the discovery is yours. You must be the one to present it to the Linnean Society. I will sponsor you. I will introduce you to the right people. They will be skeptical, of course. A woman, an amateur, but the evidence, he smiled, a real warm smile that transformed his weary face. The evidence is undeniable. Anoni Amelia will speak for itself. An offer, a door opening out of my gilded cage and into the wide, brilliant, challenging world. It was everything I had never dared to dream of. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. The thought of facing a society of learned men, of defending my work, sent a tremor of fear through me. But the thought of staying here, of slowly suffocating, of my discovery being nothing more than a strange story told at dinner that was infinitely more terrifying. I looked at him, the moonlight catching the earnest light in his eyes. "Yes," I said, the word coming out stronger and clearer than I expected. "Yes, Julian, I will." My announcement that I would be leaving for London to pursue my scientific work was met with stunned disbelief. It was one thing for a famous man to praise my hobby. It was another thing entirely for me to act upon that praise, to presume to have a life beyond the confines of Oakengrove. "Leave," my mother repeated, as if I had suggested traveling to the moon. "But Amelia, what will you do? Where will you stay? It is not proper for a young woman to be on her own in the city." "I will not be on my own," I stated calmly. "Mr. Blackwell has offered to introduce me to his sister, a widow who lives in Kensington. I will stay with her while we prepare the paper for the society," my father blustered. "A paper? My dear girl, this is all well and good, but you have duties here, and what of your prospects?" "My prospects, father," I said, looking him directly in the eye, "have just improved immeasurably." There was a new steel in my voice, one they had never heard before, and they did not know how to argue against it. Once they realized I was resolute, a bizarre transformation occurred. It was as if a switch had been flipped. Suddenly, my peculiar obsession was no longer a source of embarrassment, but a point of immense pride. The speed of their reversal was breathtakingly insincere. "I always knew you had a brilliant mind, dear," my mother declared, fussing over the packing of my plainest dresses. "You simply needed the right encouragement. We must have a new traveling suit made for you at once. You must represent the family well." My aunt, who had once lamented the dirt under my nails, now told her visiting friends, "Our Amelia is a prodigy of science, a true bluestocking. She corresponds with all the great minds, you know." They were desperate to attach themselves to my newfound reflected glory. They didn't care about the years of work or the intricate beauty of the science. They only cared that a man they deemed important had declared me important. Their sudden effusive support was more isolating than their decades of dismissal had been. It was so transparently self-serving, so completely devoid of genuine understanding, that it confirmed the rightness of my decision to leave. They were not proud of me. They were proud of what my success could do for their social standing. The journey to London was a journey into a new life. The city was a noisy, sprawling, exhilarating beast, a world away from the suffocating quiet of Oakengrove. Julian's sister, Mrs. Allister, was a kind, intelligent woman who welcomed me into her home without fuss, treating me as a scholar, not a curiosity. Julian and I worked tirelessly in the dusty library of the Royal Society, surrounded by the ghosts of Newton and Boyle. He was a patient and exacting teacher, pushing me to articulate my observations with scientific rigor, to defend my conclusions with evidence, and to write with clarity and confidence. The day I stood before the assembled members of the Linnean Society is a day forever etched in my memory. The hall was a sea of gray beards and skeptical faces. I was the only woman in the room not serving tea. My hands trembled as I began to speak, but as I laid out my findings, my voice grew stronger. I spoke of the marsh, of the thistle, of the subtle variations in wing venation, and then Julian, my sponsor, unveiled the specimen case. A collective gasp went through the room. Men crowded the stage, peering through their spectacles, murmuring in disbelief and excitement. There were arguments, challenges, and rigorous questions, but as Julian had predicted, the butterfly itself was the most eloquent argument. It was an undeniable fact of nature, and it laid waste to their doubts. That day, I walked out of the hall no longer as Miss Amelia Meadows of Oakengrove, but as a recognized contributor to the greatest scientific conversation of my era. Years passed. I did not return to Oakengrove except for brief, dutiful visits. I took a small set of rooms near the British Museum and, with the backing of Julian and other newfound colleagues, established a small laboratory. My life became a happy rhythm of research, correspondence, and spirited debate. I published other papers, contributed to several books, and sponsored other young women who dared to enter the world of science. Julian and I remained the closest of friends and collaborators. Our bond was one of the mind and spirit, a partnership deeper than any marriage. He respected my independence, and I his. We were two celestial bodies that had found a shared stable orbit, content in our mutual gravitation. One autumn, a letter arrived bearing the Oaken Grove postmark. It was from Isabella. Her handwriting, once so fluid and confident, was now thin and spidery. Her husband, Lord Harrington, had passed away, leaving her with a title and a mountain of debts. Her beauty had faded, and her social circle had moved on to younger, brighter stars. Her letter was filled with a sort of weary nostalgia for a past that had never truly been. "I hear such tales of your exciting life in London," she wrote. "You travel and meet such fascinating people. Sometimes I sit in the drawing room at Oaken Grove, and it is all so quiet. I wonder what it would have been like to have found a passion for something more than parties. You were the clever one, Amelia. I see that now." There was no bitterness in her words, only a profound, hollow sadness. I folded the letter and looked around my study, at the beautiful chaos of my books, my specimens, and my work. I felt a surge not of triumph, but of quiet, profound gratitude. Her world had shrunk, while mine had expanded to encompass the entire globe. Being underestimated, I realized, had been the greatest gift my family had ever given me. Their dismissal had granted me freedom. Their lack of interest had allowed my strange passion to grow in the dark, unmolested, until it was strong enough to break through the soil and find the sun on its own terms. They had forced me to seek my own validation, to build my own world, and in doing so, they had accidentally set me on the only path that could have ever led to my true self. And so, that is my story. It's a story about butterflies, yes, but it's more about the cages we are put in and the ones we build for ourselves. What I learned in that dusty little room is that your worth is not determined by the applause of those who are simply looking in the wrong direction. I would love to hear your own stories. Share a time in the comments below when you felt underestimated and how you found your own way to prove your worth, if only to yourself. Your stories give strength to so many others here. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, and please subscribe for more stories about finding your own wings. Remember, the world's most beautiful and important discoveries are often made by those who have the courage to quietly look where no one else is looking, to value what no one else can see. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and thank you for listening.